The day had taken a peculiar turn. As much as Cameron seemed to be occupied, Mary Margaret knew she had to tell him what had happened, not least because several $100s vanishing from their shared account might worry him. As soon as school finished, she headed for his shop. Normally, she didn't venture there for the simple reason it was so cluttered up with sad remnants of other people's lives that she felt uncomfortable. How he could stand it, she didn't know. The bell above the door jangled. Her husband was at the counter, bent over the books, a pen in his hand. He looked up, surprise crossing his face, and set the pen down. She could count the times she had visited his shop on one hand, so his expression wasn't unexpected. "Mary Margaret," he said. "What are you doing here, dearie?" She tried not to look around too closely at all the objects stacked here and there in organized chaos. "I thought you ought to know I've had to take several $100s out of the account," she said, approaching him and the counter. She gave him a quick smile. "It hasn't just walked out." He looked at her in puzzlement. "Several $100s?" he asked. "You? When you wouldn't even let me buy you that pashmina you liked so much." Mary Margaret blushed. Her husband was careful with their incomings and outgoings, but she was even more careful when it came to little luxuries. She wasn't one for being spoiled with fancy things. A simple bunch of hand-picked flowers were much more personal than the silks and jewels he had often offered her. "I wanted to help Henry," she said. "You've heard his birth mother's in town?" An odd expression crossed his face. "A blonde?" he asked. "Emma or Gemma or something of the kind?" It was her turn to look surprised. "You've met her?" "I ran into her at Granny's," he said. He closed over one of his books. "I didn't catch anything else about her apart from her name." He offered one of his sparing smiles. "So you met her, did you? What did you think?" Mary Margaret propped her arms on the counter. "She seems like a good person," she said. "Very tough, but she managed to get Henry smiling again. He went looking for her, apparently." Cameron's lips twitched. "I did wonder what might have brought her here. Which reminds me," Mary Margaret added sheepishly, "he stole my credit card to trace her. I haven't had the bill in yet, but I have a feeling it might be quite steep." To her surprise, her husband only laughed. "Well, well," he said. "He's learned some tricks from his mother after all." His eyes glinted with mirth. "Did our gracious mayor make any noises about recompensing us for her son's theft?" Mary Margaret pulled a face. "Think we'd have more luck finding hen's teeth." "We can cross that bridge when we reach it," he said, bracing his hands against the edge of the counter. "You said you had splashed out? A little treat for Henry and his birth mother, was it?" Mary Margaret shook her head. I bailed her. She'll pay me back, but she didn't have anything to hand." Cameron's eyebrows rose. "On the DUI charge?" She was unsurprised that he had heard about it. No doubt everyone in town had seen the Mirror's report about the woman's accident. "On the robbery with menace charge," she replied. "She allegedly threatened Dr. Hopper and stole his files on Henry." "Robbery." Cameron raised his eyes, sealing words. "Regina?" "Emma Swan doesn't seem the type to threaten Archie," Mary Margaret admitted. "Regina isn't happy that she's here. It's the only obvious conclusion." "And so you bailed her?" She met his eyes. "It felt like the right thing to do." He smiled, and it softened his features. It was the expression she liked on him, but normally she only ever saw it in the privacy of their own home. "I'll trust your judgment, then," he said. "Will this Miss Swan be staying?" "I hope so," she said. "For Henry's sake." She sighed. I know Regina tries to be a good mother, but you know what she's like. She thinks raising a child is the same as running a council and that her vote is the deciding one. Emma makes him smile." Cameron hesitated, his eyes flicking from her face to her crossed arms on the counter. He reached out lightly and patted her hand. "I know you would have been a wonderful mother," he said quietly. "I can imagine a daughter just like you." Mary Margaret's eyes pricked with tears. It was rare for him to bring up the one fly in the ointment of their otherwise good lives. She blinked hard and smiled quickly. "We still have time," she said, turning her hand to squeeze his quickly. "Time," he agreed, then withdrew his hand and looked down at his books. I hate to have to chase you off, dearie, but you have work, she said with a quick nod. Will you be home for dinner? He hesitated again, and she could feel the gulf opening between them again. Perhaps invite Miss Swan, he suggested. I can't guarantee I will be home, but that way you would have company at least. Mary Margaret straightened up from the counter. I might do that, she said with a small, rueful smile. And I'll put some aside for you. She reached across the counter to squeeze his hand. You can tell me what's bothering you, Cam. You know I'll listen. For a moment, he just looked at her, something strange and sad in his expression. I know, he said. You deserve a better husband. Well, I don't want a better husband, she said. I have you. He looked down at their linked hands, their matching wedding bands gleaming in the dim light. Yes, he said quietly. You do.